number of years ago and was a part of Calvary when she was there. What year did you graduate, Allie? 2017. All right, so if you've been around before that, you've seen Allie before, and you've visited at least once since then with your presentation. Anyway, she's kind of one of our own of sorts, so we're thankful that she's visiting today and is going to give us the lowdown on how she's serving in Japan and what God has done for her and for others. So we're happy for that. So let me pray for her, and then I'll hand it over. So let's pray. Our God, thank you this morning that your people can be gathered in your name. Thank you, too, that we can be reminded of what you're doing on the other side of the planet, in the hearts of unbelievers and bringing them to yourself, and believers and growing them up in the same ways that we see in your word as we study it here, maturing and growing your church according to your good wisdom, according to your purposes. So thank you for that. Thank you for Allie and her role there, and thank you that she can speak to us today and testify of your goodness. And so we ask that you would be honored as good in this hour. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Allie. You going to juggle a laptop and a mic at the same time? Okay.
Just work down that way.
Yeah. It's hot.
Oh. Thanks. Morning, everyone, or おはようございます。皆さんこんにちは。So, I am Alexandria Schrug, and Isaac already gave a really great introduction. It's good to see many of you who I recognize, and I am excited to meet those of you who I haven't met. It seems like Calvary has grown so much since I left. It's always exciting to return to churches and get to see how much God is growing them and using them in the areas they are. So, just wonderful to see you all. So, introductions in Japanese. 自己紹介. I am Alexandria Schrug. In Japanese, my name is Alexandria Schrug. Most Japanese, that's a bit long, so they call me Ari. There's a funny story about that. When I was first in Japan and learning how to introduce myself to people, I was at one of the churches. And they had me stand up in the church, and they were like, this is a missionary who's going to be helping with our church. And they said, why don't you introduce yourself? And I had been practicing how to say my name in Japanese and how to introduce myself to them. And I even checked with one of the kids in the church, is this how you say my name? And they were like, yeah, it's good. And I'm like, okay. And so then I stand up and I say, 私は Ari desu. And I said it wrong because Ari is aunt in Japanese. And so the whole church was laughing at me because I introduced myself as an aunt. And I'm like, what did I say wrong? But for my name, it's Ari. You extend the I sound. So just a little different from aunt. But yeah, Japanese can't say my name, Ali. So they always call me Ari. So I've gotten used to it. It's very much my name now. So why Japan? Japan is a country that is very full of paganism. I don't know if you guys know very much of Japan, but often we hear of it being a first world country. You equate that with Christianity, but that's not the case. And oftentimes we see things being lovely. Oh no, sorry about that. There you go. So, but that's not the case. And oftentimes we don't see Japan as a mission field. I know I didn't see Japan as a mission field as much before I went over there and before I learned about Japan. In fact, when I was going to school here, I thought I was going to be a missionary to Africa. And then when I started to see that that wasn't where the Lord was drawing me, I started to be interested in Asia because every time I met a missionary, they were going to Africa. I'm like, they don't need me over there. But they still need missionaries. But that was just what the Lord was using to slowly draw me away from that mindset. And so as I started to get interested in Asia, I wasn't sure where in Asia the Lord was drawing me. But then when I met my mission agency, they introduced me to a couple serving in Japan, and they were ministering to, the wife is ministering to young ladies and discipling them, and it's a great need over there because so many young ladies, because they don't have, their society, they have a saying in Japan that if the nail sticks out, it will be hammered in, basically. And so Christians stand out, obviously. We aren't meant to match this world. We're not meant to blend in with this world because we're called to be ambassadors to the world, not in the world, but not of the world. So for a lot of them, it's very hard. In high school, that's when that starts to be pounded into the young people. And you even see it in the way they dress. They don't wear often a lot of bright colors. Some will be, the ones that'll stick out, but it's very few. So oftentimes you'll see it in just the way they dress and the way they act in society. No one wants to stand out. No one wants to be that person. And even the Christians struggle with it because Christianity is not looked at it's looked at as a cult, basically, in Japan because they have very little history with Christianity. Because before, during this time of the samurai, they had one ruling shogun who decided to shut Christianity out of Japan for a period of time because during that time, the Catholics were coming in and they were using it, the Roman Catholic Church was using it to gain power in Japan, and this shogun saw that, and he saw that as a threat to his power, so he decided to persecute Christianity and shut it completely out. And so anyone who was still a Christian while he'd shut it out was persecuted, and they had their form of a cross that they would hang the people on. They wouldn't necessarily put nails through their hands, but they would hang them on it and sometimes drown them on it and many other things because that was the way that they saw pictured in the Christians' religion. So that's often how they would do it. But Christianity didn't come into Japan till much later when America forced Japan to open when they wanted to trade with them. But for a majority of time, they only had one port in which the Dutch were able to trade with Japan, and Christianity was not allowed in. And they had a way that they would test whether you were a Christian in Japan, too. Because they were Catholics, they would have basically the idols that the Catholic Church has within it, that Mary and the baby. And so they had this item called the fumi, which was a cross with Jesus on it, and they would make the Japanese step on that. And if they couldn't step on that, they knew they were a Catholic, and then they would persecute them. So I do think God used that because the Bible did get into Japan during that time, but sadly, many didn't understand the truth of Scripture at that time. And so Japan still doesn't have an understanding of the basis of the Bible. And so you see in their culture, it's very pagan. All of these are pictures of their idols, actually, that you see everywhere in Japan. Roads will go around their idols. They're so important to the culture and the society still to this day. The top left is in the bamboo forest in Japan. So that right there is a shrine that even tourists will visit and even practice at. You'll see many tourists just feeling like they're just getting to try out the culture and do it. And it even encourages the Japanese in a sense. They are very excited. But the foreigners are participating in their form of worship. That middle one is just some idols alongside the road. They're not famous or anything. They're just there. And then the one on the far right top is a giant statue of Buddha. Because Japan has two primary religions, Shintoism and Buddhism, and they often mix the two. I don't know how many times I would talk to a Japanese person and they'd say, I'm futatsu, both. Because Shintoism deals with beginning of life and living. They have their kami, the spirits. Shintoism is a religion of 8 million gods. So when you have 8 million gods, it's pretty easy to add whatever else to that, just to make sure you're covered for. And so with that, they have a great admiration for nature because the kami are nature. They're the spirits. Mount Fuji is called Mount Fuji-san because that's a respectful term that you call people. I would say Pastor Matt-san or Sensei Matt-san. And so it's a term that you title out of respect. And so they call the mountain Mount Fuji-san. They call a lot of things san that aren't. They call animals san out of respect. The kids especially. Not so much the adults anymore. But often the adults will even call the mountain that because it is, in a sense, one of the gods, Mount Fuji. So they worship nature rather than the creator in that religion. It's very animistic, and it's also, they're a very syncretistic culture, meaning that they take things that they like and mix it with what they already have. And then Buddhism meets with Shintoism in the middle because Shintoism doesn't deal with death and dying in the afterlife, because it's just the gods and appeasing them in this life and getting, the luck that you can get from them. Whereas Buddhism deals with death and dying and achieving enlightenment. And so at that point, when they'll often say, I started out Shintoist and I'm going to die Buddhist. Because also all the graveyards in Japan are usually owned by the Buddhist temples. And if you want to be buried there, you have to be a Buddhist. And you have to also pay basically rent on your gravesite and for your family as long as they're going to be buried there. If it's all long generation, then you're going to keep paying rent all of that your life, and the next person will pay rent because you want to be buried there. And if you no longer want to, your family can be evicted from the cemetery. So it's kind of very much a mindset there. You don't want to disrespect your ancestors too, because they have a slight bit of ancestor worship mixed in as well. So with that, to say your ancestors were wrong would be to dishonor them. And to basically get them evicted from the cemetery would be to dishonor them. People would see you as being basically a traitor to your family. So that's very hard for them too, especially since Christianity doesn't see or do any of those things. And then if you see the bottom left, that is just a statue along the road on someone's private property. And he is maintaining it, as you can see. He's put a little hat and a little bib on it. There's a story that goes with that. There was a man who was at work one day, and on his way home in the snow, he saw these idols along the road, and he thought they must be cold. So he went home and he got a hat and some bibs, and he covered them up so they'd be nice and warm. And on his way, he went on his way. And then the next day, he went back to work, and all his work was done for him by those very grateful idols. So that's why this farmer is doing it on his property. He's hoping they will help bless his work. So they very much take care of them. The one in the middle was just a fun one I saw in Tokyo. It was very interesting. I'm not even sure if it's exactly an idol, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. They're just everywhere in the middle of cities and in the middle of woods. I was out just for a hike by the camp in the middle of the woods, nobody around, nobody goes down that road but foresters now. And there was an idol in the woods I just came across. They're just everywhere. And that one on the far right bottom is the Asakusa, which is actually a Buddhist temple, but Buddhism will tell you they don't have gods. But this temple, the gate, has the kaminari, which are the kami of lightning, the spirit of lightning and wind. And so they have them inside those two boxes on both sides of that red gate. And on the back, they have the giant slipper of the supposed deities, and it's massive. So it's a picture of what they think that God's foot looks like. And that's at a Buddhist temple. So it just shows how much they mix their religions. And so there is a great need in Japan. But why was God bringing me there personally? And why? So Japan is a country that God has put in my life even before I even stepped into Japan, and I didn't realize it until I came back from Japan. My grandmother has worked for a Japanese company all of my life. My parents took in a college student in our town who was Japanese, and she would basically live with us and go to church with us. She never accepted the Lord. We're still slightly in contact with her to this day, but she always saw that as a Western religion, your religion, and she'd participate because in Japanese culture, you can participate in other people's religion. You might put on that religion for a moment, but you can take it off just as easily. And so she would participate, but she never accepted. And that's often the case with a lot of people in Japan because it is so syncretistic. So it really is building a relationship and helping them understand that Christianity is also a relationship with God. It's not just this thing to appease this spirit or this God. It's not just something you can put on and take off. And so they think that even just attending a church service is making them a Christian for that moment. One lady I talked to said, I became Catholic for a moment. She's like, I attended a Catholic graduation for my granddaughter. She attended Catholic school. So yeah, I became Catholic. So that's very much their mindset, and it's really difficult to get past at times. We have a lady who's in our Bible study who she sees, she says she's a Christian, but she talks about how she goes to temple and shrines still during the holidays, and how She has potentially in her house some idols. We were a little unsure if that was what she was saying, but how you cover one when you're going to worship the other so you won't offend the one, and then you'll cover the other so you won't offend the other. So, just keeping the spirits happy in your house so you can have as much blessing from them as possible. It really reminded me of how Paul was in the city where they had in the Decapolis, where they had all these idols, and how there was the altar to the unknown God. In a lot of ways, Japan is just kind of covering all their bases, but a lot of them will say they're not religious, but they'll still go to temple every New Year's and every holiday because they just want to cover their bases in a sense. Oh, and I also worked for a Japanese restaurant later where the owners were Japanese and my manager was Japanese, but he was a Christian. So it was very interesting to talk to a Japanese Christian who was living in America. He is charismatic, but I do believe he's saved. He was very excited when he found out I was going to Japan because of the great need for people to tell others about their faith. A lot of the Japanese Christians struggle to tell others about their faith. They feel that's the job of the pastor. So they can bring them to the pastor, and that's the pastor's job from that point on. I mean, sometimes we get that mindset in America too, which is not a good mindset because we're all called to tell of our faith. But they struggle with that a lot, and they separate their faith from their work lives too, which, again, something we struggle with here too as well. So I went to Japan having to make a decision. I spent 2 years in Japan. I was supposed to spend 1. I came here right before I went there for that 1 year, but I've been in Japan for 2. So the mission agency wanted me to go to Japan and make sure, because Japan is considered a missionary graveyard, not because missionaries are dying, but because it's such a hard field, because it does take so long to see fruit in the lives of the people you're ministering to, because it is a relationship building. Many of them don't want to hear what you have to say unless they know that you care about them. So it's such a hard mission field that many missionaries will come off of it very discouraged. So the mission agency wanted to make sure that I hopefully wouldn't be one of that number. So that's why the first year internship there. But it ended up being 2 because by my first year, I was like, I don't have enough information yet to make my decision which couple I'm staying with or how much I need. So I'm going to stay another year. I would have happily stayed another year. But they were like, okay, you've probably had enough time to make your decision. You need to come back and tell us. So I was like, fine, I'll come back. But I'm hopefully only here for 4 months and then back again. But I was deciding out where in Japan I would be also ministering in Japan. They have 2 couples with my mission agency, one in the countryside more, reaching people out there, and one in the city. So I'll give a little bit more information about that. I don't know if you can see those tiny red dots. The one in the middle is Gifu Prefecture, which is very rural. They have a lot of rice fields. It's very much that picturesque Japan that you imagine, but not city. In fact, the transportation, you do have to have a car in that area, because if you try to take a train from one point to the other, it'll actually extend your time of travel. I've had to do it several times when I didn't have a car. It was not fun. The other one is Chiba Prefecture, which is the city. And that is actually right next to Tokyo. And it is a city of 9 million people. And Tokyo, which is right next door, and they actually run into each other, is a city of 13 million people. So there are a lot of people there. The missionaries there actually live in what's called a mansion. It's just an apartment type that's bigger than 5 floors, and usually has a courtyard with it. Their mansion is a group of like 7 buildings from 14 to 12 floors each, and it's about... They estimate there's about some 1,000 people in that complex of buildings alone, and that's currently where they're trying to plant a church. So just a fun fact, Japan really loves their characters. I don't know if any of you guys know this about Japan, but they really love their characters. So these are just some characters. So each prefecture in Japan, which is like a state, has a character. Each ward in Japan, which is like a county, has a character. And each city in Japan has a character. And you see them on everything. Legal documents will even have their character on it. And you'll be like, wow, isn't that very cute? They seem very friendly. But, even your bill might have something. You're like, that's cute, but, I could do without that one. This is Gifu Prefecture, and this is their character, Minamo-kun. And kun means it's a boy, by the way. These are the couple that are working in Gifu, Debbie and Phil Milton, and I was interning my first year with them because they have been on the field longer than the other couple, and they have a more established ministry, and so I was training under them for my time there. So I have a lot of pictures from them, but I'm actually partnering with the other couple, and you will see why in a minute when I show their pictures. So they have a camp ministry called Camp Rafayada, which is very much outreach, but also discipleship. So they have summer camp ministries to children, church children who invite their friends from school, and then English class students come. And many of these kids have never heard anything about the Bible. And so this is their first opportunity, and it's very interesting to see their curiosity, but at the same time, you do see a little bit of that, these are interesting, but I'd rather play. But at the same time, seeds are being planted, and we do know that some kids have made professions of faith, but sadly, oftentimes, you don't necessarily always see those kids again. Same in America. But as God continues to work in Japan, we pray and hope that these kids will get connected with other Christians, and more seeds will get planted, and they will come to saving knowledge of Christ. So these are just some fun pictures of the camps. The top left one is the Ladies Missionary Fellowship. So they use the camp also to encourage the missionaries, and they have MK Kids Camp, which is Missionary Kids Camp, to encourage the missionaries' kids even, because they're all over in Japan and they feel like very much alone. And so this is an opportunity for them to come and get to see they're not alone in Japan. There are other missionary kids and have fellowship. And so it's very good for discipleship. And then the one on the right is Kids Camp, and those are all kids from the community there. And there's a lot of foreign kids there, Filipino, Brazilian, so not just Japanese, but you get a nice mix of them. So I did get to participate with my limited Japanese skills. I got the English group, because often the Filipino kids can speak English, so I got to help with them a lot. But the Japanese kids would come up to me, and no matter what, even if they knew I couldn't speak to them, they would just start talking to me. They would tell me things, and I'm like, I have no clue what you're saying. Which in Japanese is wakannai. And no matter how many times I would try to tell them, I really don't understand. Sorry, sumimasen. They would still talk to me, and it was great because they didn't care. They just wanted someone to talk to. And so I just got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'll just listen to them, even if I can't understand. And it really did help me learn my Japanese too. By the end of it, I knew kids' Japanese. So those bottom ones are just some more pictures of the kids' camp and just the number of kids that we sometimes see at the camp. There is a limited number of staff, but so even though I'll be working with the other couple, I'll still hopefully get to go back and help with their summer camps, just to add to their staff number. So these are some pictures of the camp ministry as well, and it is a labor-intensive ministry, and they are definitely looking eventually to have someone replace them. So if any of you guys are interested in camp ministry in Japan, and you really love labor-intensive building stuff, feel free to give them a call. I'm sure they'd be very happy to have you. But it was very, I definitely lost some pounds there. But we would the middle one on top is for baking Christmas cookies, just as an opportunity to get to know the community, and even for the English class kids, and to just get to tell them what Christmas is about. It leads an opportunity to share with them. The top, for you guys, left one is passing out the cards at the school. Those schools in the countryside are much more lenient about the Bible. They, in fact, let one of the pastors there go into the school and actually teach a Bible class to the kids just because they're curious about American culture. And they see that as American culture. And so he has an opportunity to teach in there. And then they let us stand right outside the gates and pass these flyers out for camp. And so several of the kids from those schools will come to the camp as well. And then they have three different church ministries currently. This is their Japanese church ministry, which they passed on to their son-in-law, who was a Japanese kid in their ministry, who grew up in their ministry, and now is the pastor. He's married to their daughter. And they are going strong. And it was fun to be able to help with their ministries. They have English outreach, which is a great opportunity to share in Japan because they're so interested in English. And that's just something God is using to be able to reach the Japanese people. As well as they have ladies ministry, and they even have, what is it? They have even a ladies English classes, because not just the kids want to learn, but even some of the older ladies. And they have, so just to give you an idea of how long it takes to reach Japanese people, they have a lady that basically as long as they've been in Japan, and I think they've been in Japan some 50 years, they've been friends with this lady just about, and they've been reaching her with trying to reach her with Christ that whole time. And they thought she got saved because she really loved to hear about the Bible. They gave her a video about the gospel, and they thought, like, she had said something that made it sound like she'd accepted Christ as her Savior. She definitely knew that she believed it to be true, but later she came to them and said, my husband will never accept Christ, and because of this, even if I know it's true, I cannot accept Christ because I can't leave him alone in that. And so she has since started to distance herself from them. And so that is the mindset of some. So it is a hard field, but at the same time, you have others who are just waiting to make sure they really believe this before they accept it. But at the same time, you can see that they are excited to learn about Christ. They're just wanting to make sure they have it right first. But again, it's relationship building. And then they have the Sakahogi Church, which has 3 churches out of it, and they plan to plant a 4th in that church. They have a international church there, then they have a Filipino church there, and a Brazilian church there, and then they are hoping to plant a Japanese church in that church as well, mostly because the Japanese and the international church don't seem to get along always so well. So they're hoping to, just because, sadly, in Japanese society, whether or not you've been in Japan for several years, you will always be a foreigner. That is just very much the mindset. You don't look like us, you're not one of us. Even kids who are considered half, they have a derogatory term in school, and a lot of times those kids are bullied, and it's called hafu. And so some families have actually left Japan due to their kids being so bullied by being hafu. But thankfully, in the Christian community, there's less of that. But there's not a large Christian community, so many of the kids who aren't often suffer from that. And there is a large suicide rate in Japan from just the pressure of parents as well as from this cultural perfection mindset. They very much are, in a sense, under a law. They want perfection, and as we know, you cannot achieve perfection. That's why we need Christ. And so just helping them realize that Buddhism is a cultural mindset of achieving enlightenment, perfection. Buddha supposedly achieved perfection, and that's what they aim for, many of them. I have a Vietnamese friend who I go to language school with, and she's let me into her house. They have an altar of Buddha in their house, and I've talked to her about it, and she's like, I can't lie, I can't do these things, I can't do any of these things. And I'm like, but you lie. And she's like, yeah, I do. But hopefully one day I will not. And I'm like, huh. And so she's let me share because since I've allowed her to share with me, she's allowed me to share, and little by little, at first you could tell she didn't like to hear about it, but little by little the Lord's opened her heart. And before I came over here, she's been having marital problems, and she's to the point that she was happy to let me pray with her for that. So I'm hoping that the Lord will help in that situation so she starts to see that he is working in her life. But she's had what she calls a spiritual experience with Buddha in Vietnam. And so when you have such an experience, it's hard for you to think that that's not real, because Satan likes to use miracles too and things as well. And that's why we're told signs aren't necessarily the way we can tell that it's from God, because very much it happens in Buddhism. So these are some more pictures of that church and how it's healthily growing. And then this is Chiba, where I am working full-time, and in that city of 9 million. This is their character, Chiba-kun. As you can see, he kind of looks like this prefecture. That was on purpose. This is the family I'll be working with full-time, Jared and Nozomi and their 5 kids. I'm actually currently doing a discipleship class with their oldest daughter. We started right before I came, so we didn't get too far into it, but one really cool thing about that is her friend, who is not a believer from school, a very nice Japanese young lady, has decided to join us for the first class, and we're hoping she'll continue. She was very curious, and she has been at every event that we've held, and she's heard the gospel several times, and we went through how the Bible came about, and I may not be able to speak fluently in Japanese. She understands some English, but Emmy speaks fluently in English and Japanese. And where I couldn't get it across, Emmy translated it all into Japanese for her friend. So it was a great opportunity, and we're praying that she'll continue to come with Emmy. Emmy is really encouraging her too. So hopefully when I get back to Japan, we can continue those lessons. And this is one of the outreach ministries we do. We do, because Japan has a fondness for America at this point in time, because of how MacArthur handled things after World War II, they have a high respect for Americans. Not every Japanese, of course, but the majority. In fact, MacArthur was known for having said, if we don't, he asked missionaries to come to Japan, and he said, if we don't fill it with Christ, it'll be filled with everything else. So Japanese have a respect for MacArthur, and Americans due to that fact, and so it's been a great opportunity to share Christ with them, and hopefully help them understand also Christianity is not American, because maybe it comes in our culture, but it's not an American culture, and so it's not something just like they can be Japanese and Christian, so helping them understand that. But we've used Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter, and even Valentine's as opportunities to reach them with the gospel. We have parties on those days, and we invite people, and we are able to share about Christ during that, with Thanksgiving telling why we're thankful to God, Christmas, what Christmas is about, Easter, what Easter is about, and even with Valentine's for some of the kids, just about the love of God for them, because that's what we're celebrating, love, right? And what better way to celebrate love than to celebrate the maker and the very definition of love, which is God, because God is love. And so just having that opportunity to share with them, it's been pretty amazing. And these are some of the kids' outreach, as well as the ladies' Bible study and Christmas outreach. So the top left is kids' cookie baking, which happened at a Christmas event, and as well as the bottom right. So those were two different events, and so just some of the kids that showed up. And the bottom one is us sharing about Christ and his birth with them. It's hard to keep their attention for a long period of time, so that's why we have the cookies. Then the ones in the middle, as well as the bottom left, are my language class friends. So those are some people that the Lord has put in my life through language classes, and I've just been able to invite several of them over to my house. Something about Japan being very much keeping the foreigner separate causes a very deep loneliness in foreigners, which has also been an opportunity to share with them about Christ, because they really connect with each other instead. And so it's been an opportunity for me to get several young ladies into my house and just share Christ with them. And some of them have been believers, and just an opportunity to fellowship with them when they're so lonely, and hopefully point them to a church where they can have fellowship. So that bottom left one is 3 ladies from my class. 2 are Chinese and 1 is Vietnamese. 2 of them I am currently trying to reach with the gospel. 1 is very curious, but there is a very deep language barrier. She speaks Chinese, I speak English, and we only can meet in Japanese. And it's a little bit like playing charades sometimes. And she is so curious about the gospel, and I am so excited to share it with her. But sometimes we have to use our cell phones, and that works. I'm so thankful for that technology. And sometimes it doesn't work so great. And then other times, God has provided interpreters from our language classes who speak both of our languages, and we'll just go back and forth in both of our languages while she's asking questions. And that's been a blessing too. It's not always something we can do, but it's been amazing just that God's provided that. And then the girl in the middle, that Chinese girl, is actually a Christian who I'm hoping to be able to disciple when I get back, Lord willing. Though I was told while I was here that she might be getting involved with a cult, sadly. So she could use some prayer. Her name is Ma-san. So please pray for her. And then, so support. So I can definitely appreciate your prayer support for my ministry. And if the Lord has placed it upon your heart to support me financially, then great. But if he hasn't, prayer support is something that everyone can give. It's not something that is unimportant either. That is one of the greatest tools in our arsenal, really. It is powerful. And we know where 3 or more are gathered in his name, he will be there. So I very much ask that you would pray for my ministry, that, again, if God has put it on your heart to support it, then great. But you can still partner with me through prayer. And where you guys are currently, you guys are in ministry as well. And so Missionary's job is not just to come and ask for support from you guys, but to encourage you also. It's our job to help you remember, hey, you guys are in ministry here where you're at, where God has placed you. He wants you guys to be sharing the gospel. There's these countries, yes, that people, God has called them to. Maybe he hasn't called you to them, and maybe he has, and if he has, you really should be listening to that call that he's placing on your heart. I loved hearing missionaries because God was slowly using them to help encourage my desire to be in ministry in Japan and other. So I pray that he uses me to help encourage you to that also. But if not, you guys are very much able to reach the people in your community who are also struggling, and it's also a relationship building opportunity here. You guys are planted here for however many years God has planted you here. So you have neighbors, right? You have coworkers, right? So you have however many years God has placed them in your life for to share with them about Christ. So I pray you would use that opportunity and not see it as unimportant, because that is very much important. So if we still have time, I don't know how much time we still have, I would be happy to answer any questions you guys have. Oh, and please visit me at my table afterwards if you want to try some Japanese candy. Yes. Not necessarily. What they do is basically so I didn't mention this in the presentation, but there is a layout of the temple, and you have to visit sections of it. In one way, it actually really reminds me of the tabernacle, which is a very interesting thing. They have their washing area, which the Hebrew temple had. They have their area where they have their incense burning, and they have basically, in a sense, a holy of holies, which you don't go back into, which is where the kami dwell. And they even have a little offering box and everything, and just the situation and layout of it is very similar to the tabernacle. And there are areas where only their priests or monks are allowed to go. So what they do is they go to each of those stations. You have to go to the washing station first, and you wash and make sure your hands are clean. It's very ritualistic cleaning, like the Hebrews were told to do, even. So that just watching them do it, you're like, wow, I kind of have an idea of what they were doing in the Bible, but at the same time, it's really weird that they match up. But at the same time, Satan likes to use that which is closest to the truth, so it makes sense. But they go from that station to the incense, and where they'll try to get the incense on them, and then they'll go to the top where you put the money in the box. And they even have a bell sometimes, not all of them, where you ring it. So just the stations. And usually, if they're from that area, they know the stations. And also, usually you can tell where to go. I have been able to observe it many times. Some of my Japanese friends have tried to convince me to do it, and I'm like, I'm good. I'm just here to watch. They even have little boxes where you get to try your luck to see, and then you get a paper, and it tells you your fortune. And if you don't like it, you can get a new one. So, as you can see, if it's a bad one, you're supposed to do this tying off thing, so, that goes away. You don't have to keep that luck. So, it's very interesting to watch, and the red one that I showed a picture of, the Kaminari gate, they have a dragon on the underneath of the part of the gate where you walk under, and they will all touch it. It's very interesting to watch, and you see tons of foreigners in there because it's also a marketplace. So you go into the marketplace, and further up is the Buddhist temple. And so lots of foreigners will come, and you'll see them even participating in the washing and the incense, and it's very interesting to see how many people are there. It'll be packed so much that one time we were walking through the first time I was there, just for the missionaries to show me what it was like at a temple at this time of the year. We were walking, and you were like basically up against a person here, and here, and you're like, I'm not really sure I like this, but they're all enjoying it, it seems. I don't know if they like being pressed up against each other like that, but they're a little bit less space conscious. If you've seen people being pushed into trains, that's a little bit helps that mindset. But yeah, so they aren't waiting for enlightenment. They just have to go through the process, and you are basically trying to get luck from that kami, and then you go home and you hope. You can even buy little things from, there's a little shop with little luck charms, and you can buy those too to help you pass a test, to help with your marriage, to help with anything, really. So, anyone else have it? Yes.
Is it very expensive to live there?
Right now, the yen is actually weaker than the dollar, so right now it's not, but that could change. But also, I'm a single person, so it's thankfully, the Lord has definitely met my needs in a lot of ways that were unexpected. He has helped me find an apartment that was cheaper than most people's apartments are, and also just the way he brought it about was pretty miraculous. The Japanese said, that never happens. I was like, well, I'm kind of surprised, but not surprised. Basically, my apartment would be 550 yen, if the $550 if it were equal in yen, but it is $350 because of the current difference between the two. But that's not very normal price to get in Japan, and especially for the size of my place. So normally most apartments are just your bedroom, and that's your house, and you have your kitchen, your toilet, and all that in that same little space. Families can buy bigger ones that are more expensive, but most single people will have something like that. But I was able to find that, and it has 2 rooms. One I'm using as a living room and for guest space, and then it has a kitchen dining area as well that's separate from that. So the Lord's just provided me with a space. I was praying for ministry space, and He provided it. And I didn't have hardly of the paperwork I needed to get that place when I got it. They said, we will happily wait until you have it. You can just bring it in when you've got it, which was not normal. And they are even harder on foreigners, so that was just a miraculous thing. For me, no. A lot of other people might, but I don't know why people think I'm starving. I don't think I look like I'm starving, but all of my friends have this desire to feed me. my unsaved friends and my saved friends. They'll be like, come eat in my house. I'm like, okay. It's an opportunity to be with them in fellowship for the saints, and also an opportunity to share with my unsaved friends. And it has really, that's not very common to be invited into people's homes in Japan, because they usually go out and meet people at restaurants. That's more common because houses are so small. That's their personal space. So unless you're really close, they don't bring you into their homes. But I've had the opportunity to go into so many Japanese people's homes, and I don't know why they just feel the need to feed me. It's very great, though. I get to try so many different foreign foods. And so I don't keep as much food in my home at the moment, but just because it goes bad so quickly. And they send me home with food, and I'm like, I'm good. But yeah, the Lord's just been taking care of my needs in that way. So I have thankfully not needed to buy as many groceries. But yeah, for other people, it can be about $300 to $400 for a single person for groceries. Or even just going out to eat because they eat out so often. But again, with the dollar being higher at the moment, you have to take that into account as well. But yeah, I've been well provided for. And I feel like even though they keep doing that, somehow I'm losing weight. Maybe that's just the Lord helping them feed me more. Or the walking. There's a lot of walking. Yes. There's not really that much. So they do sometimes have city ones. Maybe some will cremate their family members and keep them in their homes, but the majority of people are Buddhist, so the majority will bury them in a Buddhist cemetery. So there's not really a need for it at the moment. But again, there are very few community ones. But yeah, there's also no benefit really to having your family buried in a Buddhist temple because they don't have groundskeepers like we do. You have to go and constantly clean your family's grave, and that is part of the tradition as well. So every certain time you go and clean, and so the ones that are well kept are well maintained by their family, and the ones that aren't, you can tell, are not being maintained by their family. But yeah, the Buddhists won't do that. That's your job. So there's not really a benefit there. It's just to be able to rent a plot. Yeah.
So is the entire nation either Buddhist
Some will say they're not, but it's really hard to get an accurate number reading on anything in Japan because they're so syncretistic and because they're like, oh, I participated in this, so I'm this now. So it's very hard to get accurate readings, but the majority will be Buddhist or Shinto, or both, most likely both. Though a lot, if you ask them up front, they'll say, I'm not religious, so I'm not really. But then if you ask them, do you go to temple? They'll say yes. So it's just part of being Japanese in their mind. You go to temple. Yeah. I'm not sure of the exact number. I know in my area, there's some Presbyterian missionaries, but there's not a lot of them either. There's a school there. But with my mission agency, there's only 3 of us, 3 units, as they call it. But in all, it's not a large number. I've seen it somewhere, and it's still pretty low. And when we have the basically evangelical group, we'll do mission conferences. It's not a large group of us that get together, but it's still wonderful to be able to fellowship and hear what they're doing in their areas. But yeah, definitely could use more missionaries in Japan. So if that's something God's placing on your heart, feel free to go. Anyone else? Yes.
Really curious about the culture. So do most households have 2 incomes? Mom stay home and dad.
So that actually, Japan is still a very male-dominated society. So oftentimes, the wife is expected to stay home and take care of the family in Japan. She's supposed to quit her job. Some families, you might need that to them both have jobs, so you will say some do it. But it's more common for the husband to be working, the wife to be taking care of the kids, and when the kids are gone, then she starts working again if she can. But oftentimes, they also have 2 houses. Or 2 apartments, because the husband will not live at home the majority of the week. He will live at his other apartment, and he'll come home for the weekends. So he's oftentimes not there. Their schedule is so crazy. I am so glad I'm a woman and I'm reaching women. I have way more access to women than the men have to the men, because the men work such long hours, and they're constantly moving. And basically, if you want to schedule with one of the guys or one of the working ladies even, you have to schedule months in advance sometimes just to be like, hey, you want to go to ramen? Well, let me look at my schedule. How about next month at this day? So it's pretty crazy. So it's very hard to reach the men just because they're constantly working, and when they do have free time, they want to spend it with their families or out partying with maybe their friends. So with the ladies, it's a little bit more easy because when their kids go to school, they have time, they go shopping, or some of the ladies that we have in our Bible study, they're just moms, so they have that time to come over to Bible study, and they end up staying for like several hours, and we just talk with them, and it's been a great opportunity to reach them with Christ. But for the men, it's harder to find ways to reach them. And also Japan, I would say, is a very moral people in one sense because they're, in a sense, under a law, but they have their things that are kind of known sins that are hidden, but everyone knows it's going on in Japan. They have a high rate of pedophilia that's actually acceptable in a sense. They have young girls who are basically stars, and their whole following is older gentlemen. They're not allowed to touch, but even the parents are the ones who are basically their kids' agent. So that's one of the things going on. I actually ran into a guy who had just come back from that one time, who was a foreigner, and he was constantly telling me, it's not a bad thing, it's not a bad thing, it's not creepy. I'm like, oh, you say so. I didn't say that, but it really was creepy. And he was just definitely trying to explain away his sin. I haven't met a Japanese person who does that. They usually won't tell you, but I don't know. This foreigner was drunk, so he was happy to tell me what he was coming back from. And it was a very interesting conversation. And then they also have a lot of love hotels. There's a high rate of infidelity in Japan. It's just very common there, especially with the husbands living away from their wives and having separate apartments. And it's not considered cheating if they go to a prostitute by the majority of males and females in Japan. That's part of their culture from previously. So it kind of carried over. So it's not uncommon for that to be a large part of their lives. So, yeah. You usually have a larger number of women, yes. And some of the guys actually got saved through their wives, usually. You'll have a number of guys who came to know the Lord through that. I've seen some churches where they have a younger group of people. I think it's because they just had some people in the church who had younger people, who brought in younger people while they were in high school. But that's also an age group where you lose more people too. So, yeah, the majority would be probably ladies. And one of the churches that I was helping with, they have a ladies group led by the pastor because none of the ladies, even though they've been all going for years, feel qualified to lead it. So they don't feel like that could be something they can do often. They feel very inferior in a sense, which is very sad because that burdens the pastor a lot, and he doesn't have the opportunity to do some of the other ministries that he could be doing. So my hope is to hopefully help encourage some ladies within church. That's why my heart is really much for discipleship, because there is a lack of discipleship amongst the women. Yes, they're saved, but they don't realize that they are also to be a part of the ministry, to be growing themselves, and that they can be leading these ladies' Bible studies instead of putting that burden on the pastor. So very much a need for discipleship of women and men in Japan. Yeah. So currently I'm working on language school, raising support for language school. So my goal is to raise hopefully $1,000, and I think that probably would cover it. So that's what I'm hoping to raise for monthly support before I go back. But for me, as a single person, it's not as expensive as family. So, but I also tend to live cheaply. So my mission agency tells me that's not always the way to do it. But so far, the Lord has definitely provided, and I've not been too worried about it. So I think that would be technically 75% of my current support. So just the way the Lord has provided has been great. If the dollar does get weaker than the yen, then maybe I would have to raise more support, but I'm hoping that, that lasts a while longer. It's definitely been a plus. Yes? They are Americans. The wife is Japanese, but they have lived in the U.S. for, she was married for 7 years, and she went to college here before that. And so she is an American citizen, and so they're supported fully by American churches. But it has been very beneficial since she doesn't have to learn the language. So that's been and then her husband, he is American, but he has Japanese ancestry on his mother's side. So that's what led him to Japan. Yeah. So also, now's the time to visit Japan because the dollar is. So if you have any interest in visiting Japan, I suggest now. And you can get involved in the ministry while you're at it. Any more questions? If not, I can pass it over to Isaac. Oh.